Yeah, so it's an interesting thing, right? At the beginning of the 20th century, as you had a significant increase in the number of people who were entering school, huge waves of immigration, for example, one of the ways that educators at the time tried to address this huge influx of people was to create these giant comprehensive, what they're called comprehensive high schools. And they figured that one way that they could deal with this influx of people is to create these different tracks, curricular tracks. And so based on some kind of a test or some kind of an assessment that was made, some folks would be channeled into an academic track, and that would prepare them to go to college. And then there'd be a sort of broad general track, and then there'd be a vocational track, and that would be for folks who probably didn't score so well on those tests, whatever they were, IQ tests or whatnot. And those folks would be given a kind of strictly vocational, meaning physical vocation curriculum. Now, what's interesting about that is that when you go back and read the documents at the time, there were these theories of intellect and theories of mental activity that were embedded in that policy, and they reflect these undemocratic strains in the culture. So people would talk about certain young people being hand-minded and others being abstract-minded, as though there's no abstraction involved in doing the kind of complicated work that we see carpenters and plumbers and electricians and hairstylists do. But there were these rigid distinctions that were made, and kids were tracked based on these assumptions about kinds of mental activity and kinds of work. And no big surprise, given another undemocratic strain in the culture, the kids who were tracked into the vocational track tended to be poor kids, minority kids, immigrant kids. The kids who were tracked into the academic track tended to be more middle class and upper middle class kids, white, mainstream children. So it's been a complicated and difficult history that plays out in our schools. Now, in the last 15, 20 years, there's been a lot of attempt to rethink that whole tracking business, to do away with it, to think of other ways to address the variety of needs and needs and interests that kids bring to school. But yeah, you're right, it was built into the very school system that young people were entering into. The difference between memorizing a body of knowledge, maybe even being able to respond on a test and demonstrate that you have memorized it, the difference between that and then being able to use it to solve a problem is a kind of classic distinction, I think, that's made in education. The great American philosopher John Dewey was very distressed about the way that schooling would tend toward the memorizing, tend toward the focus on the textbook, tend toward the giving back of knowledge that's memorized on a test, and then that's the end of the story. He had some kind of an example that was just wonderful about how a kid could learn all this stuff about geography and then walk outside and not know a thing about the river going right by his schoolhouse. So the ability to take knowledge and apply it is, I think, a huge indication of a high level of learning. And if you think about it, it's absolutely essential in so many kind of training sessions and academic settings, so many training settings and academic settings. Medical school, dental school, physical therapy school, right? You don't want a dentist or a cardiologist or a physical therapist who was maybe the best student in the class on the textbooks, but ham-handed and not very sharp in applying the knowledge. You want somebody who's incorporated knowledge and then brings it out into the world to solve problems, to figure things out, to make a difference, to make an imprint of some kind. And that's what tradespeople do, right? Tradespeople are able to take bodies of knowledge and bring it to, that clogged up toilet or that botched dye job or the busy restaurant. It's that application of knowledge that I think is so important and so impressive to me. we tend to we'll judge people's intelligence by how articulate they are. And again, I think if somebody's very articulate, we can assume some kind of verbal facility, right? But what about all the folks who just don't feel comfortable expressing themselves orally, or are shy, or are people of few words? I grew up with a lot of folks like that. But you watch them do certain kinds of work and you're just stunned at the quality of intelligence. So one way we judge people, sometimes incorrectly, is through how they speak, and that can be how articulate they are, how much they say. It can also have to do with accent. Sometimes we make these attributions about people based on accent. I think another quality that we judge people sometimes incorrectly is how quick they'll respond to something. And let's face it, if you go through a lot of schooling, you get pretty good at responding quickly to things, right? You are almost trained that way, especially as you go through college and graduate school. But I've known a lot of folks who just think it's foolish to start to mouth off. They sit back, they're quiet, they think it through. And those are sometimes the people who are most thoughtful and you can trust the most in the judgments they make. So there's other ways societally that we make judgments about people's intelligence that aren't always very sound. It's interesting, we talk every so often about the need for a national discussion about something. Bill Clinton suggested we needed a national discussion about race. I'm not sure that ever happened. And then Barack Obama gave that powerful speech in Philadelphia on race. That sparked some discussion, I think. So there's various topics, right, that people occasionally say we need a national discussion about. I think one thing we need a national discussion about is social class. And maybe hand in glove with that, we could have some kind of discussion about these various biases that play out from social class. And one of them are the attributions we make about people's intelligence. There's a perception that if people do working class work, they're not as sharp as the person with the white collar doing the white collar work. Now, I'm not saying everybody holds that perception, not at all, but it is in the cultural air we breathe. And I think it's a very undemocratic strain in a democratic culture. And when you get in close, this is, I think, the point of the mind at work, when you get in close to blue collar and service work done well, there's just a remarkable amount of intelligence, of mental acuity on display. And I just wish we were better as a culture at acknowledging that. Because if we were, I think it would have an effect on some of the kind of schooling we create. I think it would have an effect on the way we organize work, the kinds of responsibilities we give people. And I sure think it would have an effect on some of the cultural divides that are creating such heat right now in the culture. I firmly believe that some of the kind of political and cultural tensions that emerge are because, working class folk feel the disdain, I think, that some of the culture have toward them.